And so, in a rather interesting way, and you could see perhaps hints of this, I think, actually within Deleuze's writings itself, where he talks about, the revolution, of course, eventually, you know, gets coded. And so, what really, happens in perpetual revolution, or one of the outcomes that could perhaps happen, is, of course, a, rise of again, a sort of, decentralized, or at least in its appearance, authority that actually is able to take our sort of desires and use them for the functions in a mass democracy. One of the interesting concepts that I really like is, the idea of the individual, or, the reducible down to a sort of a function, or a number, really. And so, this loading desire ultimately has embedded itself into this technological bureaucracy. And so this desire to be imperceptible, that, ultimately is always, negated, really, by, whether it's like structures, or as it's turned out with, the scapegoat. Deleuze talks about the scapegoat in prior, forms of authority, and how, it mobilizes not just the war machine, but the apparatus itself, and its negation of outsiders. One could perhaps see then an authority would actually want to incorporate, a sort of outside, and actually, use that to conceal their own power. I think, really within contemporary leftists, this white faciality, and their chapter on it, one could perhaps see, that this, dominant, structure, this dominant people is, what's holding us back from the, the transcendental project, that we're actually going to become, greater humans only after, we escape these particulars of the prior, traditional structure. Ultimately, as we've seen, where Deleuze's concepts themselves are now used in sort of advertising, to feign away, or to give such a goal of imperceptivity, and actually put it in the function of the state itself, or even the global capital structure. And so, once that's harnessed, once you could perhaps control this sort of desires of the outside, in your commodification of power, really. One, of course, you'd have to actually reduce everyone down to these individuals, which I think Deleuze in many ways actually did see coming. And so, certain events within this decade, if you will, one could, of course, argue that policies actually, reduced us in numerics of simply, so many lives were, saved, but what was the actual intensities, the qualities of those people's lives? Is the life of a 5-year-old trying to, get an education the same as the life of an 80-year-old senior? And I think there's something distinctively, anti-human about, such policies that, fail to really, that really failed to account for that. And many of the times it turns out that wasn't actually benevolent to begin with. But if I was going to, go through the politics and really the ethics here, and what to really pull away, perhaps, I would ultimately say, though, that, one must actually understand and learn the structure that they've, been thrown into, whether they are actually in the inside or the outside, which of course has become more blurred, I would say, in this technological, decentralized world we find ourselves in. And so one actually has to embody, to some degree, the very processes that actually created the structure they find themselves in now, in order to actually make the very value judgments that are necessary in harnessing and being nomadic towards novelties. Material novelties are happening all the time around us, but we don't actually make any sort of judgments or place any values on them. Sometimes there's discoveries made where a genius stumbled onto something 70 years too early. Nobody really can actually understand, in many regards, what they were actually trying to say, and then it turns out, of course, in that sort of Bergsonian sense, this was always actually something that was going to be possible, but that sort of judgment was missed, and it could only be seen in the exterior. And so this is to say then that you can't really be a true minoritarian unless you actually bother to some degree represent the faciality that you actually are put in. Now, of course, I think to be charitable, to say the least, to Deleuze here, how does one actually do that without simply being compromised? You're putting yourself into a sort of system and expect to actually come out not only authentic, which was of course a big deal to Deleuzian ethics, but how do you simply not just become a sort of a pawn, a token within this system, a sort of diversity hire, quite literally. But I don't think that you can actually escape that. And I think to some degree, in social reformations, whether it was Christianity and Protestantism, or the concept of justice, which is very interesting in the Greeks, and how it shifts from Sparta to Athens with the Socratic man. There's these multiplicities, these especially in what I think ultimately is why this is a world of faith. Something like faith or love. You can't really pull away from how it's particularly embodied within everyone, and so it becomes this sort of very empty but also full term at the same time. And I think that's only possible really in a world of faith. Of course, this is speculation, and one could ask then, what's the difference between being dogmatic towards your tradition, towards a system, towards your aesthetics, and actually just simply making speculation, experimentation. Picasso and these people we consider genius, they were robust studiers of their structures or their disciplines, and so I think that's far more within the way Deleuze at least thought of the revolution, of thought of novelty. The nomad, yes, they're always in this sort of flux. There's no sedentary space for them, but of course, just like with the shaman, they still bring back to the group. They still want to share to the group, just like Zarathustra and trying to bring truth to the people, and that struggle against things like the circus, the philosopher who usually is a daydreamer who thinks out in the sun alone, or the great novelist. They usually live these very lonely lives because, they're trying to get into, the life beyond just themselves. But that ultimately still has a robust understanding of your particularness, so much so that the writer almost has to shut himself away completely. And I've noticed this with lots of other writers I talk to, that in order to be productive, they quite literally have to shut off the rest of the world that makes their sort of particulars, so that way they can pull out the universals, the stories, the narratives, and the themes that I think are really what we should be taking away from Deleuze's philosophy in our political projects. And so we shouldn't be nomadic simply for the sake of it. And as of course they famously point out, there's no singularity, there's no deterritorialization process, if you will, that can just is going to just save the day. There's no propositional truth, there's no abstraction, there probably isn't even necessarily a sort of authority figure that could just do away with all of our problems, and I think that also ties into why, again, the incarnation and Christianity really puts forth to embody actually Deleuze's philosophy in this world of process that I think is necessary in order to have Christ event, to have the Christ event, or to have faith. This is a world where you can have the union with God, while of course at the same time only believing in the ionic chance, and such a world can also, at least to me, be one of just accidents. I think we would have eventually, if it was just simply an accident and sort of the chaos and complexity, we would have probably found some sort of I think it would actually be an easier way to understand the world than the world we live in, where there's multiplicities and multiple meanings and multiple truths. One of my favorite demonstrations actually of this is with Wittgenstein, where he does his investigations, and ultimately he concludes really that he doesn't really understand why do people have different meanings in states of affairs, and you can kind of tie that into events and novelties here. Everyone is sort of put through the particulars, put through being into the flesh of God, put through of course with Deleuze, when he goes after the familial structure, why is that? Is because of course one must obey the father, or even the vacant father, simply not having a sort of authority there at all, actually just simply co-opts you to a different authority, to one that you recognize more into yourself. But the father, just as the arborescent tree that hands down the seed in his shade, is actually the first real authority system one is put into the world, in the natural world, quite literally. And so I think that really puts a bow on my thinkings and interpretation of Deleuze's philosophy. I used to try to play with the I'm a right-wing Deleuzian. There's definitely limitations and interpretations that they're are inescapable. I really think that I don't really think that there's much value to trying to present yourself as a sort of right-wing Deleuzian in this sort of paradoxical way. There's a clear distinction to why there's limitations to what Deleuze was trying to do with what perhaps we could pull out of it. But yeah, this is a very long ramble video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, despite how messy it's probably going to be throughout. But I just wanted to share some of these thoughts and clear up some of the thinking that I noticed is actually, I think, really important to how someone could take the greatest, perhaps materialist metaphysician of of human history, quite literally, and still come out of that and still find Christianity, still find new creativities actually to exhibit creativity within a tradition even that I think actually subtly is perhaps not to him, but a way to go about his philosophy.